Hi, I'm Laura, your connection coach. Have you ever felt lonely? In a world that feels increasingly divided, it is more important than ever to find ways to connect with others. Loneliness is a common experience, but it doesn't have to be a permanent one. On the Bliss Republic podcast, we explore all the ways we connect with each other and discuss the benefit of having strong relationships. We believe that the key to overcoming loneliness is connection. My guests come from all walks of life and will hear about their unique experience with connection. Whether you're looking to deepen your existing relationships, build new ones, or simply feel more connected to the world around you, the Bliss Republic podcast is for you. So today we have with us Elise Griffin. Elise is a breathwork facilitator and ice-bath coach. So you are the creator of Soul Breath, a space for breathwork and cold immersion. You work out of the northern beaches in Sydney and created a community of over 10,000 people to date, hosting weekly ice bath sessions on the beach. So welcome to the Bliss Republic podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I've been so excited to record this podcast.
Yeah, great. So I was actually curious because I came to some of your ice bath and breathwork sessions in DY on the beach, and I just love the whole setup of being on the sand with a couple of people that maybe you know, maybe new people you get to meet. And it's also this very like-minded community of people. And so, yeah, I really got interested mostly in your story. And you've been immersed in this kind of work for about 5 years now. What made you become a breathwork facilitator and ice bath coach?
Well, a long road leading to where I'm at right now. And it started off when I was a young girl. I was super confident. I had loads of friends. I was school captain, public speaking champion. Everything in my life was just going really well. And at that point, I had never really experienced any kind of nervousness or anxiety. I was super confident and a real go-getter. And then I moved into high school. And my transition into high school was a lot more difficult than I think anyone had planned. Myself, my family. What I found was I'd moved from a very small pond with very few fish to a really large pond with loads of fish. I didn't know anybody. My school was a long way from where I lived. There were no friends from my primary school that came with me to high school. There were no friends in the area that had gone to the high school that I had gone to. So I felt very alone. And it was for the very first time in my life where, in reflection, I started to experience a really high level of anxiety. At that point in time, I didn't know what was going on for myself. I didn't know what these big emotions were that I was feeling. I think the time when I grew up was a time when we weren't really ever taught about our emotions. We weren't ever encouraged to express them or move through them. And so what I decided to do was to take it on myself to try and find a way to make myself feel a little bit better. And without being able to talk to anybody about what was going on for me, I never really wanted to be a burden. I never wanted to show that I was struggling at all. So I turned to a level of control, something to help me to control the world that I was living in, which seemed extremely chaotic at the time, and to control what was going on for me emotionally within my body. And how I decided to do that at the tender age of 12 years old was to start to control my food, start to control the foods that I ate, or more often than not didn't eat. And I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa at the age of 13. And what happened at this time was that I felt like if I could control the food that I ate, the amount of exercise that I did, if I could not eat for a whole day, then to me, that day was successful. I felt a sense of calm, a sense of peace, and I really felt like I could continue on and continue going into school and trying to make friends even though I was really struggling. what I look back on is the fact that here I was in this big pond trying to unsuccessfully make friends. And then I bring this eating disorder into the mix. And what it was actually doing was isolating me even more from making the friends that I wanted to make, from creating that sense of belonging that I so longed for. I remember really vividly going into the bathrooms at recess and lunchtime, and I would lock myself in a cubicle and I would throw my lunch into the sanitary bin, and I would just sit there until the end of recess or lunch so that I didn't have to go out and speak to the other girls.
Wow.
So that no one would question why I wasn't eating, and so that I could just go back out and I could go straight to class. So as I mentioned in reflection, I was isolating myself even more from the one thing that I truly wanted, because I didn't have any other tools to help me with what was going on for me. So I continued through high school experiencing anorexia. There were highs, there were lows. Sometimes I'd put on some weight, sometimes I'd lose a lot. And through my obsession with exercise, at the same time, I started to really get into sport, which, although it didn't do much for my eating disorder, it did a lot for my sense of belonging. And it gave me a reason and a purpose to be going to school, because I could be involved in these sports. I was a very good cross-country runner. And I think as I started to become more successful in the sporting arena, I was a national level cross-country runner. I really immersed myself in it. And what I started to realize was that I actually had to start to fuel my body a little bit to be able to perform at the level that I was at. So I did manage to put on a bit of weight. I was still experiencing extreme levels of anxiety, so the psychological aspect wasn't really addressed. This is the thing with eating disorders. You don't always have to look like you're anorexic to be anorexic. A person that is carrying a bit of weight can still be exhibiting the behaviors and the anxieties and the stresses without actually looking like they have the illness. So I did start to get a little bit better with an increase in the food consumption. And then I left school and I moved out of home. And upon moving out of home, I got into a relationship and fell in love with my very first love. And what came with that at such a young age was, not too long after, was my very first heartbreak. And I think we can all, have some kind of memory of how intense that very first heartbreak is. And again, still having never been taught the tools to regulate my nervous system or deal with really big emotions, I turned again to the one thing that I knew could help me to find some kind of sense of control in a really chaotic world. And that was the restriction of my food. And team that with living out of home without the supervision of my parents, who were a really big part of helping me to get better while I was at school, I dropped to the lowest point of my illness. And I think the lightest that I weighed at that time was 36 kilos. So that's about 25 kilos lighter than the woman that you see today. You've met me. I'm not a terribly large person. I'm actually quite tiny. So you can imagine taking 25 kilos off the woman that you've met. I was very, very, very unwell. And I remember one day going to my parents' house and them sitting me down and saying, "Elise, you need to get on the scales. We are so worried about you." And the anorexic mind, it can be very turbulent. You haven't eaten much food, so you're pretty hangry. And I remember yelling at them and just being like, "I'm not doing this. You can't make me. I'm fine." As a person experiencing anorexia, you don't see what everybody else sees. You see someone when you look in the mirror who's fat, who's ugly, who's unworthy. So I wasn't seeing the woman that my parents were seeing. I wasn't seeing 36 kilo Elise. So they finally managed to get me on the scales. And I remember looking down and seeing 36 kilos come up on the scales. And it was almost like this penny drop moment for me of, oh my goodness, I'm not well. I need some help. And so it was from here, this was really the turning point for me to start to take things seriously and to be, I've got to do something about this, or I'm not going to be around for much longer. So I started to see a dietitian, which was really helpful because with my perfectionistic mind and my eating disorder, she gave me a plan. I started to put on weight. I still didn't really have any psychological help, but I started to begin to look after myself a little bit more. And I've always been very interested in the spiritual world, in mind-body practices and things like that. And so I decided that part of my healing journey would include becoming involved in my local yoga community. So I started to attend yoga classes.
And how old were you at the time you started your yoga journey?
I would have been around 20, so quite young. And I remember attending the yoga studio and just finally beginning to feel a sense of belonging, that sense of belonging that I had longed for since primary school. So for quite a long time in my short life at that stage, I started to become more and more involved in yoga. I started to notice that my anxiety levels or the feeling within my body, because I still hadn't really tied the two together that I was experiencing anxiety, but I knew that I started to feel better. I started to feel calmer. I started to feel more connected to myself. And I was like, I must continue this. This is really good for me. But as I mentioned, I hadn't had any psychological help with my eating disorder. So there were still a lot of feelings of low self-worth, low self-esteem. I didn't really like who I was. My negative mind would always be beating myself up over my appearance or who I was, and I wasn't getting any help with that. So what I found was that I was finding things arrive in my life that were very reflective of how I felt about myself. And how that showed up for me was in quite abusive relationships. So very toxic, either physically or emotionally abusive relationships. One of those particular relationships was when I was having extreme panic attacks. The physical and emotional abuse that was exhibited within that relationship was just tearing me apart. But with my low self-worth and low self-esteem, I truly believed that that was all I deserved, and I would chase after my partner continuously, just hoping and wishing that he would show me the love that I so craved. And I remember one particular night just having the most awful panic attack, and he had gone out to the pub with his friends, and I remember calling him and saying, please, I'm not well, can you please come home? And he was like, no, I'm out with my friends, like, you'll be fine. If you want, you can come down and I'll give you a cigarette, you can have a cigarette. And I remember just being like, oh, I need to be around him. So I went down and I saw him, and then I came home, and I got to a point where I was just so worked up that I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And I went down and I got into my car and I drove up to a local area, and I had a plan. I don't really know what my plan was. I was so worked up, but I was either going to drive off a cliff or I was going to run into a tree. One of the two. I was done. I was like, I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. Someone was looking out for me that day, because when I drove up there, the gate was closed and I couldn't actually access the area that I would have needed to go to do what I wanted to do. So I turned around and I started to drive back home, and I remember getting into my street, and again these huge feelings of overwhelm, of panic came up, and I put my foot down on the accelerator to the floor and I drove the fastest that I could, and I was going to hit a tree. And I then had this huge feeling come over me, and I was like, Elise, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh my goodness, you don't want to do this. Like this is not what you want to do. So I was this close. And so I drove back into my home, and I took myself up inside, and I was like, this is it. Things have to change. Like, you've been doing this for too long. And I stayed in the relationship, but at that time, because of the relationship was so all-consuming, I'd let go of my yoga practice. So what I decided to do was return back to my yoga practice. And I remember one specific day lying in Shavasana at the end of a yoga practice and hearing what I now know as my inner wisdom and my intuition. It stepped in and it said to me, Elise, you need to get out of this relationship, and you need to really take getting yourself better seriously. So I went home that evening and I ended my relationship. and I moved home with my parents, and I started on my healing journey. And what I now can reflect on, why I was feeling this healing effect from the yoga, was that through that yoga practice, I was in fact practicing breath work. Because we all know each yoga pose is directly linked to a breath. And so what I was doing while I practiced yoga was I was slowing down my breathing. I was connecting really, really beautifully with my true and authentic self. So by the end of the class, I was able to receive these beautiful, wise messages from within. So I continued to really absorb myself in the yoga community. I started to get some therapy, and I really started to heal. And the more that I got involved in the yoga community, the more confident I got. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start to attend some workshops. I'm going to start to really get into what this yoga studio has to offer. And I remember one specific day walking down the hallway of my yoga studio and seeing this poster up on the wall. And it was of this group of people in this icy looking lake, and they were all just screaming at the top of their lungs. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm doing that one. So I had no idea what this workshop was that I signed up for. I knew it said breathwork and ice baths, or breath and ice or something. And I had always been very into my exercise and my training and my yoga. So I was very curious about the ice bath component. And I was like, I've always wanted to have an ice bath, simply for the recovery aspect. So I went along to this workshop with zero idea of what I was in for. And I experienced my very first transformational breathwork session. What I experienced in that session was something that I cannot, still to this day, put into words. I felt and expressed emotions that I had been repressing for years. I was able to make contact with what I could say would be my higher self, and I was able to really find some clarity and some clearness on the direction that I wanted to go in my life, and it was just life-changing for me. And then, of course, we were guided into the ice bath practice, which in itself is just such an incredible experience. I hopped in the ice bath not knowing what to expect. And what I experienced was the most beautiful state of calmness, of stillness, of clarity, and of deep connection to myself. This peace was something I hadn't felt for over a decade at that point. It was more than that by this point. And I knew that this was something that I had to pursue. I knew that these practices was something that I had to have in my life consistently moving forward. So I started to get so involved in this. I was having, multiple ice baths per week. I was going to breathwork sessions. I was doing my own breathwork sessions at home off YouTube channels, and I was really starting to get immersed, and my life started to change. I started to attract people who were more aligned with the person that I wanted to become into my life. I started to attract new experiences that really allowed me to be myself and be my authentic self. I went down to the snowy mountains on an incredible retreat and, climbed the mountain in my bikini and jumped in the icy lakes, and experiences I had never, ever had before in my life. I actually started to feel like I was living. And I hadn't felt like that. My eating disorder had taken away so much of my life, so many experiences. There were so many things that I missed out on because of my eating disorder. And now I was actually starting to live again. And what came with that was these people that I was attracting into my life was this sense again of this belonging. And what I realized was that for so long, it was this belonging that I so craved. It was feeling like I was part of something and part of something bigger than myself. From there, I decided that it was my path in life to start to share these practices with the world. Even if I can help one person in the world to not have to walk the path that I had walked, then my work here on earth is done, even if it's just one person. So now it is my purpose to get these practices out to the world and to help as many people get the opportunity to experience them, just like I did, to maybe come along down to the beach and not really know what they're in for and then have a really profound, life-changing experience. And that's what I really hope to create.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think there's so many takeaways, and I think many people can relate. We all go through our ups and downs, and not to say, but also adversity in our various ways. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you. So you have been mentioning a few times, and you've been like the queen of breath work. What different types of breath work exercises are out there, and what is their intended influence on the body?
So I like to think of breath work as like an umbrella term for just a huge amount of different styles of breathing or breathing techniques that people can implement into their lives for different purposes. So, for example, the workshop that I attended and the breath work that I run at the beach on a Sunday and at a lot of my workshops is a transformational style of breath work. It's a style of breath work that allows us to switch off the thinking mind. So what actually happens when we breathe in these transformational ways, which is a form of over-breathing, so continuous connected breaths in and out of the body, what happens is it slows down a structure in the brain that houses our frontal and prefrontal cortex, so our thinking mind. This part of the brain is also home to our ego or our sense of self, and it can really be responsible for our like rigid habitual thinking and like our obsessions as such. So it can often be when most of us spend the majority of our lives. But when we overbreathe for about 10 to 20 minutes is where we really need to aim for in order to switch off this thinking mind, this egoic self. After 10 to 20 minutes of continuous connected breath work, what happens is we're actually able to make contact with the more emotional part of the brain. So like areas of the brain like our amygdala, that emotional center of the brain. So this is where a lot of emotions, a lot of memories, maybe particularly from childhood, can be stored. And these emotions in our subconscious or in the emotional center of the brain, they can often affect the way that we show up in our lives. They can really be the things that cause us to be triggered, cause us to react rather than respond to different things in our lives, and really cause us to not be living in the most conscious way that we possibly can. So by switching off the thinking mind and creating access to this more emotional part of the brain and to our subconscious, it gives us the opportunity to process many of the emotions that we have stored or repressed within our body. And we've all repressed emotion, every single one of us. You know, it's not always appropriate for us to burst into tears or to laugh out loud or to yell or scream in certain situations in life. So, you know, we have to repress, or we don't know how to safely or effectively express our emotions, so we repress. So it's really important to engage in these types of somatic practices, these types of breath work, in order for us to allow our bodies to release and let go of whatever we have stored there. We can process these emotions in a much better way. And then you've got more calming practices. So think breathwork practices that will allow you to calm your nervous system. So our nervous system is comprised of our sympathetic or our fight or flight response and our parasympathetic, our rest and digest response. And so these calming breathing techniques allow us to switch on that parasympathetic state. So they really allow us to calm our nervous system and to arrive in that really relaxed place. This is really beneficial when we're feeling overwhelmed, overstressed, overworked, maybe we're having trouble sleeping. So they're beautiful techniques that we can implement into our days to be able to move through life much more grounded and much calmer, much more relaxed. But we don't always want to be in this calm, relaxed state. Sometimes we need to be activated, and sometimes we need to achieve certain tasks or, you know, meet certain requirements. We need energy. We need to be able to wake ourselves up. So there's styles of breath work that are more activating styles of breath work. They're going to switch on more of that fight or flight response in the body, which is sometimes needed. Yeah, not all stress is bad. If we went through life, really calm and slow and just really relaxed, we would not get anything done. So sometimes we need that energy, yeah? And so there can be forms of breath work that we can use to allow ourselves to increase energy in the body, to increase our focus, to increase our clarity of thought, to improve our performance in certain tasks or activities. And so that's where we can use another different style of breath work to get there. Mm-hmm. And then we think of a nervous system as being something that we want to, you may have heard the term of a regulated nervous system. So many people think of a regulated nervous system as being just that calm nervous system. It's not. It's a nervous system where we can move in and out of, that fight-flight response back into more of a parasympathetic state, back up into a fight-flight response, but then be able to bring ourselves back down. So it's like we have control over our nervous system. That's where we really want to be. That's what a regulated nervous system is. It's not an always calm, always peaceful. It's being able to move. It's malleable. We can move in and out of that. And then you've got all the incredible ancient breathing techniques that come with like pranayama that you experience when you will attend a yoga class, for example. So I really like to think of breath work as just that big umbrella that is over the top of all these like thousands of different techniques that we can use in our days to be showing up as the best version of ourselves, to be achieving the things we want to achieve, to be the healthiest that we can be, to be getting quality sleep, to be digesting our food properly, getting all the beautiful nourishing nutrients from our food. The breath controls all of this. It's all about just learning which different tools we need at different times and which are going to benefit us, and then starting to really use our breath to just create the life of our dreams. I think the breath is that powerful, that we can actually use our breath in order to start to create the most incredible life, because we're showing up in the best way that we possibly can, and that in turn attracts into us things that are equally as amazing.
You mentioned that you started your journey with the ice bath and breath work, particularly for the recovery aspect and to get more out of your body's performance, let's say. But you ended up realizing that there was a lot of stored trauma that needed to be released. What would you say are some of the most common barriers for people experiencing their life to the fullest?
I definitely think it's the limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves, which are very often picked up along the path of our childhood. Our subconscious thoughts are created before the age of 8 years old. So all our experiences that we experience up to the age of 8 are kind of forming our worldview and how we look at the world and our beliefs about certain things. And what can happen when we are living life according to these beliefs, we go out there and we try and find something to confirm that belief. So we are continually attracting things into our life to confirm these limiting subconscious beliefs that we've picked up as children. And so being able to create that access to our subconscious and be able to start to process the emotions and to find more clarity on the thoughts that we have and to see the beliefs for what they are, that more often than not, they're just stories that we're telling ourselves. We can't really find any evidence in our current world that those beliefs are true if we really, really looked there. They're just things that we've stored and they're affecting how we live our lives. So the big things holding people back are these beliefs from childhood that they're still running through their minds, and it's affecting the way that they're showing up in the world. It's causing them to have these huge fears about stepping forward and being the person that they could so easily be if they just believed in themselves a little bit. If they were able to believe that they could step out of their comfort zone, that they could trust life, that they could trust life didn't have it out for them. It's not happening to them, it's happening for them. I love that saying. And I think when you can start to process some emotions, some memories, and see those beliefs that you've picked up along the way, you can really start to reprogram yourself and start to show up differently in life.
Does breathwork help with reprogramming your mind?
I would say yes, it helps, because what we can do is we can have access to those beliefs that we've picked up along the way, to that programming. So we start to create more of an awareness around how we're living our lives, the thoughts that we're having, how we're showing up in the world. What can also happen during a breathwork session is that we can feel that really deep connection to our inner wisdom or our higher self. And the more that we can make contact with that part of ourself, with that inner wisdom, with that higher self, the more that we start to actually create new neural pathways to start to think in that way. So the more that we can practice breath work and make contact with that part of ourselves, that loving part of ourselves, that part of ourselves that only has our best interests at heart, I do truly believe that it can help you to show up in the world very differently.
You recently introduced, I saw that on your website, you introduced a sauna experience to your offer. Now we're talking about hot exposure, cold exposure, and breath work. What are some of the particular risks you pay attention to?
I think contraindications for ice bathing, we always ask for clearance from doctors before people begin their ice bath journey. It's really, really important because it is a highly stressful environment for the body. It's what we call a hormetic stress. So it's a good stress. It's a controlled stress. We can choose the amount of time that we're under that stress. We choose to be in that stress, and we choose how we regulate our nervous system in that stress. So it's really, really wonderful way for us to be able to improve our response to stress, but it is a really stressful environment for the body, and there's no denying that. So there are certain people that should probably try and avoid ice bathing, or at least ensure that they have clearance from a doctor prior to engaging in an ice bath practice. You know, people who experience heart conditions, there are people out there who are actually allergic to the cold, and they can come up in hives and rashes. I've had one particular client, but we actually slowly got him into an ice bath over a period of multiple weeks, could have even been months if I think back.
Do you have any insights on that? Is that like an immune system response, or is that?
Yes, okay. So it's immune. So he was working very closely with a naturopath as well at the time. And what I always suggest with people when they're embarking on a breathwork or cold immersion journey, when they're embarking on a healing journey, is to have other practitioners also alongside them, people who may have more knowledge on certain things than what I do, so that we can both support them through that journey. So I remember he was working really closely with a naturopath who was helping him with his autoimmune issue, and we were also doing a lot of breath work. What they are finding is that there's been multiple studies done. A lot of chronic health conditions are now being directly linked to repression of emotion in the body. And there's a beautiful piece of literature that I highly recommend people read, and it's called When the Body Says No by Dr. Gabor Mate. Yeah. And he follows around quite a large number of people and who are experiencing things like cancers, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune conditions, Alzheimer's, and finding that a lot of these conditions are now being directly linked to repressed emotion in the body. So this is where breathwork can be really, really helpful for people experiencing those illnesses. So he was working with me for breathwork, with his naturopath, to really start to work on his immune system, and then we were slowly getting him into the cold, and we got him there eventually, which was really exciting.
That's so impressive. Well done.
Yeah.
So I've got some friends who are really afraid of the cold plunge and taking that first step. How can someone overcome this initial fear or discomfort associated with the ice bath in particular?
I always say lean in. Whenever we are about to go for a really big goal in life, or, transform ourselves in some way, we will always be met with resistance. And I think the moment that we can accept the resistance will be there is the moment where we become so empowered. So now I move into things that are really challenging for me. And if I have resistance come up for me, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I must need to do this, because on the other side of this resistance is going to be something pretty sick.
How do you know whether that is the resistance where behind that the goal is sort of hidden, and whether it's a fear and actually preventing you from harm?
You're just going into cold water, right? So you've got this resistance to hopping in the ice. We very often create these stories in our mind around what a particular experience is going to be like. And we spend hours, days, sometimes months ruminating on these thoughts of what a certain experience is going to be like, working ourselves up. I'm so nervous, I'm so scared. And then we experience whatever it is, and a lot of us go, oh, that wasn't that bad. I just spent months of my life stressing, sleepless nights, ruminating thoughts, and now I've experienced this thing and it was actually awesome. So that's why I'm like, lean into that resistance, lean into it. I think our body will tell us when something is actually dangerous for us. I think we're going to have all our survival instincts kick in, and we're going to know if something's more of a danger. But I think the more of what I'm talking about is when it's something that we want to do. So a lot of people that come down to the beach to my sessions, they're there because they want to do an ice bath. They want to do it, but they've just got all this resistance, or they do have it's a fear. It is a genuine fear, but they want to be there. So when we have a big goal, we want to evolve, we want to transform, and we're met with a resistance, that's when I'm saying lean in, because it will dissipate.
And isn't that so interesting that is actually what a limiting belief is? We're often not fully aware, and it's not present at the front of our mind that we are blocked. But then we are like, why am I afraid of it? It's just cold water, right? As you said. When I got into snowboarding years ago, I was so resistant to actually go down a hill. And I was like, I'm going to make it my own challenge to take risk, but take controlled risk and get over that fear. Because when we're children, we do things without that fear, right? We just go for it. And then these limiting beliefs, somehow, somewhere along the timeline of growing up, someone puts them into our heads. And they're most of the time not even our beliefs. So what are they doing in my head, right? And the moment you become aware of it, which I think that's where the magic happens, is often you're not aware of it.
What I will always tell my participants is nervousness and excitement, your body doesn't know the difference. So it's the same physiological response in the body of when you compare nervousness to excitement. Our experience of it is just directly linked to whatever story we attach to it. So if I get people down at the beach and they're like, I'm really nervous about my ice bath, I'm like, no, you're not, you're excited. When they say, yes, I'm excited, and you can see their whole state starts to change. They're like, yes, I'm excited. So it's the same thing going on within their body, but they've just changed the story that they've attached to it. And then all of a sudden they're excited about their ice bath and they're ready to do it. So it just shows the power of our thoughts, the power of our mind in creating certain experiences for us, and that we do have control over our thoughts at all time. We just have to have that awareness that you mentioned. We just need to start to create the awareness.
What are some of the bigger challenges that you are facing as a breathwork and ice bath facilitator?
For Soul Breath, I think the biggest challenge, the council. Unfortunately, it's really hard for us to set up outdoor community events. We have to pay a really big fee to be set up on the beach. If one community member outside of our Soul Breath community complains at all, then we immediately get shut down. And it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult for us to continue to operate. It breaks my heart because I know how important these sessions are for so many people. Having somewhere for them to weekly come down and connect with like-minded people and experience breathwork and cold immersion, it really keeps them afloat. I've got a number of people that attend who are battling depression, anxiety, addictions, and they will tell me, I need Soul Breath to be on this weekend. So it's really hard for us when the powers that be, we're at loggerheads with them. We're trying to tell them, we really need to be here for the community, but they're doing everything in their power to make it really difficult for us. It becomes really deflating and really disheartening, particularly when you understand the importance of these sessions for people. It's why I initially started to run the beach sessions. We'd come out of a few years of lockdowns. People were feeling so disconnected from each other, really depressed, really low. And I thought to myself, how can I bring a community of people together on a weekly basis in a really healthy way? And that's how Soul Breath Sundays and Soul Breath Sunrise were born. It weighs a lot on me because I understand the responsibility that I have to provide this service to the community, particularly with what's going on, and seeing how the community has grown so much over the past few years and hearing the feedback from those regular participants who really do get so much out of it. I think that's the biggest challenge for us. And of course the weather, but you run outdoor events, it kind of just comes with it. I am very used to experiencing all the elements, the wind, the rain, the hail, the whipping sand in my face. That's just part of running outdoor events. But the big one is, I think we need to get our councils more on board with what we're doing and understand that we're really bringing something beautiful to the community.
So when we speak about having a deeper connection, what can the combination of breathwork and ice baths do for us to feel more connected to ourselves?
There's part of breathwork that is still really mysterious, and I love that. And I think sometimes the scientist in me loves to know why and really get deep into the science behind everything. But I think there's also a part of breathwork that's very unexplained. And I think that's the beauty in it. You will come out of a transformational breathwork experience with a really new perspective on life, and you're able to really see life for what it is. You can see that the challenges that you've been through have made you the person that you are today. And so without them, you start to have some level of gratitude towards the challenges that you've faced. I feel that you also really start to forgive yourself and others. You can start to really experience a deep sense of love, which is really all that we are. So it's that reconnection to love, that deep love within yourself. And the stresses that you have in life, they start to feel less burdensome. You can see them for what they are. And I can't give you any science behind that. I can only speak from my own experience and the experience of people that I've guided through breathwork, that is often how they come out of a breathwork experience, is feeling this really deep connection to themselves, their true selves, their inner wisdom, and a clarity on how they're approaching life and the thoughts that they're having. When you think, if you're connected to your breath and you're aware of each cycle of breath that you're taking, you can't be anything else but present, because your breath is happening in the now. So if you can be within each inhale and each exhale, you are literally living in the moment. You are living life. This life force energy that moves through you brings you into the present moment. So I think breath work in that way really allows us to step into the now. And then teaming that with an ice bath practice, when I hop into the cold, all I can really do is be with myself. I can't be distracted. I can't be having conversation. I need to be with my breath to calm my nervous system while I'm in there. And then I become really aware of the thought patterns that are going on for me, and I can start to move and shift those. So I create a level of awareness around those thought patterns, and I can start to get to know myself a little bit more. And I always think the ice bath is a mirror, and it will always show me how I'm showing up in the world. It will always show me what's going on for myself, just through simply whatever is coming up for me when I'm in the cold. As I mentioned when I told my story, that first ice bath experience, I experienced this peace and this stillness that I had never experienced before in my life. And to this day, I can't find that level of peace and stillness anywhere else except for in the cold, whether that's jumping in an ice bath, whether that's going down to the snowy mountains and swimming in the lakes. All I can do is go inward and be with myself and be with my breath and be in the present moment.
Yeah, so I kind of want to tag on to that. I'm going to give you an example what happened for me at the first time. I got in the ice bath, and my first response was my whole body going into, no, this is not good. We're not going to do this. It's just you have to get out of here. It's almost like the thoughts will start attacking. They will be really strong. They will be extreme. And it's almost like trying to convince you are in an extreme situation. Your body is at great risk. You need to take action. And that's the moment where I saw many people jumping like a frog out of the ice bath. It's I can't do this. And it was in that moment where I said to myself, let's see what happens after this thought, and surrendered and gave in to that I was at peace. I think that is the sort of high that we get on afterwards of like, wow, I overcame myself and I overcame these really hard and difficult thoughts. I believe that's what makes it so powerful as well. When people are in this state, what does it do to be working with the thoughts right there in the ice bath to the overall performance of someone's mind?
So when you first hop in, it's a stress on the body. It's a hormetic stress, but it is still a stress. So your body will go into a fight-flight response. And then you bring yourself into that calm state. What I find with ice bathing is that it's helped me to create a really deep awareness over my thought patterns. So when I hop into the ice bath and I'm met there with my thoughts, I sit with them and I actually have to become aware of what I'm thinking. And then I start to play around with shifting those thoughts while I'm in there to help me to make my ice bath experience more enjoyable. So instead of telling myself, this is shit, I hate this, I don't want to do this, why am I here, this girl's a bitch, I don't want to do this, this is terrible. Instead, I can say, I'm brave, I'm strong, I can do hard things, I can do anything I set my mind to. It's only 2 minutes, it's just cold water. And then all of a sudden, as you mentioned, you start to surrender to the experience. The intensity starts to shift and you realize that you really do have control over your experience. So you take your experience there in the ice bath out into the world. If you have control over your experience in the ice bath, why don't you have control over your experience in every moment of every day? So I feel that it's a really good arena to practice this in. You hop in an ice bath, you have to become aware of your breath, your body, your mind, and then you can use this playing field to then go out into the world and start to become more aware of your breath and your body and your mind. So it's like a really good place for us to practice. And then we go out and we have this increased level of awareness around all those aspects, and we can really start to make different choices and show up differently.
So something that I really admire about you, your commitment to showing up every week consistently for the community over the past 3 years. Every Sunday, you are on the beach. To me, consistency is a discipline I would like to work on. Can you share some tips on how someone can be more disciplined around consistency?
Oh, I can, yes. It's that resistance piece, the leaning in. There are some Sunday mornings where I wake up and I think, I don't want to do this. I want to lie in bed. I can't be bothered to go down to the beach. But I lean into that resistance and I remind myself that there is a whole community of like-minded humans. And if I don't show up there each week for them, we're not going to have the opportunity to create that community. Every time, what I find is I get down there and I'm like, oh, why didn't I want to be here? I love this. This is the best. I love spending Sunday mornings like this. Know that there is always going to be resistance when you want to do something. When you want to be consistent with a practice, if it's something that's important to you, there will be resistance. Lean into it. Go at it like a bull at a gate. If there's resistance there, I'm like, okay, sweet, I'm set. Let's go for it. Don't hold yourself back. Let that resistance be a sign that you really should move forward towards that thing that you want to create.
Were there people that came to your workshop or even to a session that have experienced something spiritual, something bigger than themselves? As you said earlier, you feel deeply connected to yourself and your higher self. Does that go beyond, and do you experience something bigger than yourself?
I am always reminded that we are all so much more than what we think we are, right? There is so much more. There's this huge universe out there with so much magic in it that we can't even comprehend. I've had a huge number of people that have come down to the beach sessions that really have these out-of-body experiences. I remember one lady who lost her parents in a car accident when she was a child, and she actually saw her parents and had a conversation with them during her breath work.
Wow.
I've had, one-on-one clients that have come to me who maybe a parent has passed and they've received messages from them in some way, and then afterwards we've pulled an oracle card or something like that, and it's been directly linked to this message that their deceased parent has passed on to them during the breath work. A huge number of people that really are able to open themselves up to these experiences, but I really think it comes back to their level of surrender. If you can really trust and surrender to the experience, you're going to get a whole lot more out of it. If you go in there with this level of control where you don't want to breathe terribly hard, whether you're questioning the practice, you're really holding yourself back from getting to that level. And in reflection of those people that have had those out-of-body experiences, had those really spiritual experiences, they have been the ones that have been able to come in with zero expectation and completely surrender and trust the process.
What if someone wants to surrender and trust the process, but you realize they are holding themselves back? Can you, as a facilitator, notice that? And how can you help them?
Yes, it can be very noticeable. It will often show up in tension held within the body. You can sometimes see their eyes flicker, or you can tell that they're not deep in their breathwork journey. And what I would advise is to just be consistent with your breathwork practice. You know, more often than not, the very first time that you will experience breathwork, you will have a level of control. You will be holding yourself back. You've never experienced this before. There can be sensations that come up within the body that can sometimes scare people a little bit, as they've never experienced those feelings before, or like tingling sensations through the body, that kind of thing. So I would never say go and just do one breathwork session and never touch it again. Do a breathwork session and then go and do a few more. And the more consistent you are with the practice, the more that you'll start to really, truly surrender and trust it, and you'll get a lot more out of it. So this is again where that consistency comes back in. Be consistent with the practice. Don't just do it once and then let it go.
What has been your most memorable experience over the years?
Definitely the very first time that I went down to Kosciuszko and swam in the lakes. I, funnily enough, have always hated the cold, like with a passion. My mum has a photo of me when I was 3 years old, and I'm standing in a patch of sun in the backyard, and it's the only tiny little patch of sun, and I'm just standing in it because I was just like, I just need to be here in the warmth. So for me to go down to the snowy mountains in the middle of winter and hop in a lake that's freezing cold is something that I never ever thought that I would ever do, ever be interested in doing. But then being in that stillness and that peace and that serenity that's created by being in the cold, and then looking around you at this incredible landscape. You are in nature. You couldn't be any closer to it if you tried. And it will always be a really vivid memory for me. Was we spent the day hiking to a glacier, and we swam at a glacier, and it was magical. I felt like I was on another planet.
So was the water in the glacier, or was it water from the glacier?
It was water from the glacier.
Wow.
We were surrounded by ice and snow. Like it was out of control. I was like, I never thought that I would be doing this. And something that I won't forget from that experience is it was cold, right? It was really, really cold. And all of the general public that were doing the hike, they were like in their beanies and their scarves and their big jackets, and they were ready to go. And there was our group, and we were like strolling on in our cozies and our shorts and like, yeah, having the best time. And what I realized in that moment was, because we'd been practicing cold immersion so consistently for such a long time, was that our bodies had adapted to the cold. But that was a really cool moment when I was like, hey, I'm in my swimmers. They're in like beanies and scarves. What's going on here?
Yeah, that's a beautiful memory. I hope to make it down there one time as well. It sounds like an absolute amazing adventure. Do you have any advice for participants on how to integrate the experience of breathwork and ice baths into their spiritual journey?
I think having it as part of your daily practice. I have a morning practice that is really important to me. And before I'd ever experienced breathwork and cold immersion, that morning practice was, drinking my cacao, listening to sound frequencies, doing my meditation, pulling oracle cards, journaling. Then once I experienced breath work and cold immersion, I decided that I would implement those into my morning practice. I still have the cacao, I still pull my oracle cards, I still journal, but I also hop into the ice and I do some breath work. So I think by shifting up whatever your spiritual practice is and incorporating these practices into it and seeing how that works for you, I think personally that's what's worked best for me. Creating a practice for yourself, whether you have one already, shifting that up, or starting one and ensuring that breathwork and cold immersion is a part of that.
That sounds so good. Do you have an ice bath at home?
I have so many ice baths, and I just use my portable ice baths at home. I have my heart set on getting myself either a chest freezer or a really good ice bath that I can have at home, but I'm not there yet. So manifesting a chest freezer or a proper ice bath that I can have here at home.
Okay, so there's one question I get to ask everyone at the end of the podcast. What is the most important thing that you have learned about love and connection in your life?
Can I answer it in two parts? I think for me, love is that we are love. That is all that we are. If we strip back all the layers of conditioning, of beliefs, of everything we've picked up along the journey of life, our essence is love. We are love. And I think if we can remember that, it becomes much easier to return back to that and to practice being loving to ourselves, to others, and just showing up as love in our life. In terms of connection, I think for me, just really experiencing and realizing the importance of it in life. When I was really young, I shied away from connection. I isolated myself a lot, and it really affected my health, my mental health in a really big way. And as I've grown older, I do still tend to isolate when I'm having hard times, but the moment that I reach out for connection with others is the moment that I start to feel better. And if I look at what's going on down there at the beach every week, people are connecting and they're finding that that connection is just helping them through life in such a huge way. And as I started to delve deeper into connection and what it is and why we need it so much, I learnt that connection is one of our basic human needs. It is as important as quality sleep, quality drinking water, nutritious food. It is as important as those things. We spend so much time worrying about the foods that we ate, the water that we drink, the sleep that we're getting. How much time do we spend, reaching out to other people for connection, ensuring that we are well connected to others, because it is something that we need to survive in life. And now that I know that, when I do tend to shy away into my little cave and be the hermit that I can sometimes be, I remind myself, you need connection right now. And every single time that I reach out to a friend or a loved one or, a community of people and I connect, I always feel better. I always feel replenished. I always feel energized. I always leave with a big smile on my face. So I think really realizing the importance that connection has for us as humans, it is what we need to survive.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. If people want to know more about your work, how can they connect with you?
They can connect with me via Instagram. So I'm elise.soulbreath on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook as Elise Griffin, or you can head to my website where you'll see all of my beautiful offerings, and that's www.soulbreath.com.au.
So you have a breathwork facilitator training coming up in September. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yes. So I had so many people who attend my sessions regularly approaching me to say, do you run facilitator training? So I felt the call, and I've started working with one of my beautiful soul breath angels that helps me at the beach weekly and at a lot of my events to start to put together a breathwork facilitator training that will be available at the end of this year. It will have a face-to-face and online component and a lot of practical time as well. So you'll be getting on-the-job experience. That's where we learn the most.
That sounds super exciting. I want to acknowledge you for showing up in our community consistently and also showing up with a very high quality level of professionalism. I admire the way you lean into your work, which is far off the corporate lifestyle that we get to experience daily around us in Sydney. I believe and I see that it takes a lot of courage. I pull my head for you for really having made that work and contributing with the services that you offer to our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So thanks for coming on today. This was such a great conversation.
I loved it. Loved it. Loved it. Love you. Love it all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe and share this episode with someone who can benefit from it. Have a beautiful day, bliss and bless.